Every day, your City of Tempe staff goes above and beyond to make sure our community gets the best possible services and the most for our tax dollars. But how good is good? How do you measure it? And how do we know what we really need to make progress on some of our most pressing issues? To guide us, we developed a series of goals designed to help us improve our community based on our Tempe City Council's 5 strategic priorities. Reaching for excellence, we are comparing ourselves against the rest of the nation as well as ourselves. Some of our goals will help save lives. Some of them will help us save money. All of them will help us make Tempe a better place. Tempe Accelerates is an opportunity for you to get involved. Hear what city staff and community partners are doing to reach our goals. Your role? You are a vital part of our community. Share your ideas and help us craft better solutions. Ask questions. Be part of the conversation either in person or online. Check tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates for dates and times of our next programs and collaborate with us at Tempe City Hall. Today, we will hyper-focus on 2 performance measures. Each presenting team will have 10 minutes to share data, strategies, and progress on a performance measure. Then, you will have about 10 minutes to ask questions or offer suggestions and ideas. On the back of your agenda, we have resource questions to help you participate in the conversation. Also included with your agenda is a quick survey with space you can use to include any ideas or suggestions you might have about today's topics. Thank you for participating. Now, let's accelerate.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here for Tempe Accelerates. Today, we're going to be looking at 2 performance measures. Performance measure 1.05, feeling of safety in the city, and also 1.23, feeling of safety in parks in the city. So the presenting team is here, and without further ado, we'll let them get going. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Vince Bourbon with the Police Department, and I wanted to introduce the team that will be discussing the 2 performance measures today. To my right is Brooks Luton. She is one with our police analytics. She's a supervisor, and Commander Jeff Glover, and we're all with the police department. Today we're going to discuss a couple of the performance measures in regards to the police department. We should be done in about 2 hours, if that's okay. Just kidding. The first one, 1.05, is feelings of safety in the city. And this is tied into the City of Tempe performance measure, which is safe and secure communities. And the performance measure itself is to achieve ratings of very satisfied or satisfied with the overall feeling of safety in the city, greater than or equal to the top 10% of the national benchmark, cities as measured in the community survey. Turning over to the actual measure itself is Commander Glover.
So why does this matter? Fear of crime. Reduces the use of our amenities, reduces trust in city services and the police. Measurements of community sentiment ensures communication between community and the police, and help deliver effective strategies to reduce crime and fear of crime. To reduce the fear of crime. This ultimately relates to how people really feel about the safety within the city.
So where are we and what is our target? As of the 2018 community survey, we were at 68% of respondents saying that they were very satisfied or satisfied with their overall feelings of safety in the city. We can see over time how this measure has been trending. There's not a ton of variation, less than 10% per year. Our target is on the far right there, and you can see that it's quite high. While we're above the national average, we're not where we would like to be, which is really at about 90%. All right. So the data that we have, this map shows how our respondents felt on this measure based on where they live in the city. So it shows our character areas for the city, and they're colored by how respondents felt. So in this case, darker blue means they felt more safe. They were more likely to report that they were satisfied or very satisfied. So it's easy to see looking at this that we do better in the south of town and that we have some area for improvement in the north side of town and central. Now, Feelings of safety in the literature are related to a variety of things. Research has found that they're connected to all sorts of demographic factors. And these are pretty complicated relationships, but we're going to talk about how we did on a few of them here because the results are a little bit counterintuitive. For example, when we look at age here, on the far left, we can see these are the age groups in the survey. So we can see 18 to 34-year-olds is the first group there. Now, typically, research has found that younger people feel safer, and that, in fact, older adults are least likely to feel safe. The results of our survey, on the other hand, show that this younger age group was the least likely to report feeling very satisfied or satisfied with their feelings of safety. When we look at race, the results indicate that there's not a huge ton of variation. The first column here is white for the reference category. And several of our minority categories in the city, or non-white categories, actually scored higher than whites, which is also counterintuitive because typically when people conduct this research, white residents tend to report the highest feelings of safety. When we look at gender, we see a nice gender parity between males and females, and there's less than 1% difference between how males and females felt on their feelings of safety in the city. Where we do see a difference is on the right there, and that's either people who reported that they were gender nonconforming or who didn't want to tell us about their gender. And those people in this survey did not feel as safe as people who were prepared to tell us about themselves. And that's overall, regardless of demographic that we look at, that was a pretty clear trend. If people didn't want to tell us about themselves, their feelings of safety were reportedly lower. All right, so these are our strategies.
So moving into our strategies, presence and response. So we are committed to maintaining a visible presence within the community and building our relationships within the community. The department has proactively requested additional resources in supplemental process, which would include our overhire program, which supports providing additional officers, our dispatchers, detention officers, more of our professional staff. It also is to support our biased crimes detective. Nationally, we have had an increase in hate-related crimes, and we've seen this and experienced some of this here recently. Threat mitigation unit, the threat mitigation detective will allow for us to monitor and respond to high-profile incidents and be continuously proactive in researching these issues as they come up. These additional positions will assist with increasing our staffing and providing an optimal customer service to the citizens of the city of Tempe. For monthly crime suppression meetings, we have moved and utilized into the stratified model, which is basically this affords us the ability to have the right people deal with crime issues at the right or appropriate level when while also holding each other accountable to making sure that we're making sure that we're moving towards the accountability piece and ensuring that we're getting these items done and completed. So, for example, if you have a shoplift at a Safeway store, for instance, where we know historically where we've had some issues, the immediate response is a patrol officer coming out and dealing with that issue. If it's something that's going to be a little bit more of a continuous crime spree where it's going to be a little bit long term, you'd have maybe a sergeant and a lieutenant come up with an effective strategy to try to impede the crime that's going on within that area. If it's something that's a long-term project where you have an issue where this has become more crime, maybe it's escalated into some type of violence, then at that point you would have maybe a commander or assistant chief become more actively involved in that situation, because then it would be incumbent upon the department to reach out to maybe the general manager at that location. And so as the issues become more complex, it raises up to different levels of the department and within the organization to take care and deal with that issue. Moving forward, meeting with and educating community members about crime prevention. That's something that is incumbent on everybody within the department to do that. The department is committed to educating in our community on best practices and how to protect themselves from becoming a victim. And several times a year we do educational talks where we are contacting ASU students, going out to the fraternities, having meaningful dialogue with them about basically how to not become a victim and to how to to basically protect themselves and to have that area of personal protection for themselves, as well as the dangers of drinking and rape prevention as well. We are very sensitive to our vulnerable adult population as well, and assisting them with educating and providing security assessments to the elderly community members within the community as well. So that's also very important to us. In terms of monthly measures of sentiment, ideally, we would like to be able to have the basically monthly feedback that would come in instead of an annual report that comes in terms of the measurement of sentiment of how people are feeling in terms of their safety. So that way we can be a little bit more accurate in basically how we deliver our services as well. Moving into some of our challenges, with the social concerns, regional issues have a tremendous impact on us, especially when you're looking at different items such as homelessness within the city. That is something that is being felt by everybody within the valley, and so that is always going to be a concern for us. Community trust in terms of procedural justice, with state and many different narratives that are playing out between local, national narratives and everything. It's going to be a very challenging issue for us to be able to continue to mend fences and create that relationship and being able to reach out to our community members. But we do have a great relationship with our community members within the city of Tempe. But again, when you're looking at it from a regional perspective, there's always going to be those challenges that from the outside that you're going to end up having. Growth and development. In terms of growth and development, we're a booming city vertically with our daytime population, and then you increase that with the service population with the number of people that you have coming in and out of the city. That's always going to be a great challenge to us, as well as when you're looking at the vertical high-rises that are being built. That increases the level of staffing that's needed to actually give attention to those particular areas, because it requires us to actually have more officers respond to some of those incidents where you would have something that's going to be in a high rise.
All right. That closes out the feelings of safety, performance measure 1.05, kind of opening up to any ideas for acceleration or questions from the audience. Okay, no, just kidding.
Not so fast.
I'm just kidding.
Anyone have got one back there?
So as part of your measure, you identified that we are being compared to national benchmark cities. I was just curious if you can identify those, or how many cities are we comparing ourselves to?
Sure. So our community survey is conducted by the ETC, and our strategic management team might feel free to take over at any time on this. However, their methodology at this point includes, I believe, 11 benchmark cities of comparable size. And so when we are aiming for the top 10%, it's the top 10% of those.
Hi, as this survey is annual, how can you measure progress in between one survey and another, or gain a sense of the shift of perceptions between the results of one year and the other year?
So you're absolutely right that it's a challenge when we only have a single measure per year to determine whether or not our strategies are effective over the course of that year, which is why ideally we'd like to have representative, scientifically based polling of our community on a monthly basis, so we can get feedback more immediately as to whether we're targeting our strategies or tailoring them appropriately, and as to whether or not they're working in the short term.
I have a question about the national benchmark cities. You did say there was 11. How did we determine those 11?
They are the surveys that, or sorry, they are the communities that are surveyed by that company only. So they self-select into being a member of that sample.
In light of the recent events in the nation and the state, how is Tempe PD planning to address hate and bias crimes so that its citizens feel safe?
So with the hate crimes, I mean, one of the things that first starts off with is what does your policy look like? And so that's something that we've taken note of, and we've taken measures to basically put forth a committee to form and strengthen our policy. We have one in place already, but we felt that it was necessary to make sure that we address that policy by strengthening it up in several different areas. And so we have an active committee right now that's working on that. We are about 90% finished, but part of that is to also address best practices and to ensure that we have everything that we could possibly think of covered within that policy.
I don't have quite the global question that was just asked of you, but I was curious about the monthly survey. That just seems like a lot. How will you do that? Would that be something you would do online? It would be some sort of an app, and would it be a different random sampling every month, or?
An interesting question. So that's not something that we would do ourselves. That's something that we would contract out. There's a company that we've been looking at that guarantees a representative sample of your community every month. And they do that either using online polling. They're on various social media, as well as in certain apps you can click to take a poll. And they do that. If they don't come up with a representative sample within the month, they will phone call. They will dial to make sure that they cover all their bases. Yeah.
So you guys said that satisfaction was down more in central and northern Tempe. Do you think that might be skewed a little bit by ASU student population, or possibly just neighborhoods in the area that might be more younger trending in Tempe?
So it's a good question, and I can't tell from our community survey. Well, actually, I do have a little bit of information because the community survey does ask people if they are students or not. So we do have information as to whether or not people are full-time students. So yes, we do know that students tend to live in those parts of the neighborhood or in those parts of the city. And considering that our younger population tends to also reported that they feel less safe, it's not a surprise that those overlap. And so yes, we would need to tailor our strategies to that. When we look at full-time students, they end up being about 10% lower than people who report that they aren't full-time students on their feelings of safety, or 10% fewer of them.
Back here. So my eyes don't really allow me to see the screen real well, but so forgive me. But one of the graphs showed it, I could be mistaken, but it seemed that the percentage, we'll call it, of residents that feel safe, it fluctuates, but there's no trend, I think is what you said. So I guess, is that non-trend, or those percentages, do those correlate with the amount of money or resources in one particular year that's designated for decreasing this? And then can you, I guess, pinpoint within that one particular strategy that maybe resources were directed towards that, and maybe that made a significant decrease that one particular year, and the next year those resources weren't designated for that, so maybe it increased back? I guess, is there any correlation, or can you guys map that?
You know, that's a great question, and each year we strategize within the police department and look at crime trends and areas in the city and where we can utilize our budget appropriately if we can affect some of the strategies. One that's been huge in the support with our elected officials and the city manager and other department heads has been our overhire program, which we've been allowed to overhire. As most people know, a police officer, whether they retire or resign, it takes about a year to get someone from the time they take the test and get through the process and get through the academy and field training, go solo. It's about a year. And so we've been allowed to overhire a few officers. And so when we do lose somebody, we're not behind the eight ball, so to speak, and now a certain area in the city goes short. So that has been yielding us a lot of success, and it's where we do strategize to keep our staffing levels up. So we're not like some cities that fall under, I'm not going to say too much about the city to the west of us, but where they're down, hundreds of officers, we're usually keeping up. In fact, our staffing levels, usually we're not by a lot, but we have a few officers over our allotted allocation. So that's really helped. And again, that's usually some resources and some budget money has been shifted to the police department to continue that, so. That kind of helps. Yes.
If you had a suggestion or two of what Tempe citizens, community members could do to help others feel more safe in the community, what would those be?
I think the city does a great job. The police department does a great job interacting with community policing and the communication piece. And again, the police department, we're very fortunate to work with our peers and other departments really well, where some cities don't. So when we do have a problem in the city, we usually try to communicate and we tackle it united, because we're finding it's not just a police issue. A lot of times, I won't go in on a topic that's been discussed before, maybe homeless, but we look at, it talks about social services and community services, the police department, the fire department. So that's an area that I think as we publicize and communicate with the public appropriately, that helps us, and I think it helps them solve problems together. That's kind of what you're asking. Listen, getting involved, but also understanding a lot of people will hear things out there through the media and other sources and with social media that isn't always the most accurate. And so if you do your research yourself or the general public and understand however that mode is, to really look at a situation, because we've all done it, where you see something on the news and you're like, oh my gosh, that's just horrible that, the airplane employee just took somebody off a plane by force. But you find out the real narrative. It number one helps calm your own nerves, a feeling of safety, thinking, oh my gosh, okay, it's not that bad. And then communicating with your fellow neighbors, because again, we've seen it where some residents may not feel safe, but what they're not feeling safe for isn't really the real issue. And when they start to talk to their neighbors, they find out, oh, okay, there isn't this big burglary problem in South Tempe or this particular neighborhood. We've had one burglary in 6 months, but one neighbor has spun it up so many times and changed the narrative to where, my gosh, there was 5 cars burglarized when it really wasn't. So.
Additionally, research suggests that the more people feel that that they have opportunities to participate in the political process and within their community, the safer that they feel. So one thing that we as citizens can do for each other, I live in Tempe, is if we know about something's coming up, so park surveys, community events, elections, all that sorts of thing, the more that we can encourage each other to participate, not only does that make our city stronger because we hear more voices and we have more participation, but it also does help people feel safer.
First and foremost, thank you guys for a great presentation. A lot of great information that you guys provided. So thank you for that. The second thing is, during your presentation, you said that there was a few benchmarks or information or data sets that were counterintuitive to the national trend. Is this part of how you will accelerate or move the benchmark forward by maybe doing campaigns specific to those populations, or if you're doing a social media push or anything like that, is that part of your plan moving forward in trying to help accelerate?
Absolutely. In fact, I'd say that some of our PIOs and some of our people working on outreach right now for community outreach can take this information and target it to the relative or the populations of interest that are lower. It definitely creates an opportunity having this insight into how our community feels.
Thank you for the presentation. I do have a question about when you do your monthly polling, how will you know if we are polling well or polling poor? How do you benchmark that particular measurement if you're doing it monthly? And what cities would you benchmark against instead of just benchmarking against ourselves getting better and better?
Well, our primary concern, of course, is ourselves, so I would want to see how we're doing monthly. This isn't a replacement for the community survey and that benchmark. It's more to let us know how we're doing along the way. Although ideally we would have other things. And that company also does survey other cities, so there's potential there, but since we don't have it yet, it's difficult to explore its full potential.
In the data, is there any comparison between neighborhoods that are public streets and those that are private gated type streets?
Not within the community survey, but I have seen research on that. And I want to say that there is a difference, but it's not huge. And once you take in other factors, it tends to wash out. It's not massive, to my knowledge.
Any other questions? I did have one thing I was curious about is that as a general matter, what's the correlation between feeling safe and crime rates?
They tend to be related, or actually not crime, well, yes, crime rates. Also, there's a wide variety of factors that influence feelings of safety. So crime rates are one of them. Also, vicarious victimization. So if somebody you know in your neighborhood or has been talking to you, that will affect your feeling of safety.
Okay.
There's a wide variety of things.
Well, I know sort of as a national average that crime, part one crime has been on an overall decrease for decades now, right?
Right.
And yet, when I look at our feelings of safety, as you pointed out, Brooks, that it seems like it doesn't really follow any sort of pattern. It goes up a little bit, it goes down a little bit. Is that a function of the manner in which we collect the data, or is it a function that perhaps there's less of a correlation between actual crime and the feeling of crime, of safety?
Well, because there are so many things that influence feelings of safety, it's hard to say in our case which one of those is driving this measure. So just because actual crime rates do influence it, that doesn't mean that it's the only thing that influences it. And so we can, even if crime is going down, something else might be happening within the community that's causing this pattern or lack thereof.
And when we talk about the idea of feeling of safety, can that spill over into other areas of city services? In other words, if I think that my roadway is poorly lighted on my way home, I may not feel safe driving my car, which may have nothing to do with the police department.
Yes.
So when you ask this question, or when we ask this question, we're not limiting it strictly to crime. It can be other factors that might make you feel less safe,
Yes, and
like
in fact,
safety hazards.
yes, so disorder, public disorder is one that's not related to the police department. Additionally, comments on the survey and from other little social media sources and things like that suggest that traffic incidents in a neighborhood can make people feel that they're less safe. If you ask people why they don't feel safe, sometimes they'll say it's because people drive through my neighborhood like 80 miles an hour and I think I'm going to get run over. But yes, this is a broader measure of safety, not just how likely do I feel I am to be a victim of crime, for instance.
So I guess kind of the point I was getting to is that if you want to continue to kind of create upward trends in the feeling of safety and to measure that, it sounds like there's a possibility for a room for growth in terms of collaboration with other areas of the city.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Good answer. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Well done. Thank you. But you're not going anywhere,
No.
right?
No.
Because
No.
you're ready
Yeah.
to give your second presentation. And I'm correcting myself from earlier. This is actually about performance measure 1.07, satisfaction with police services. So take it away.
Okay, just a side note, yes, I think the police department is one of the only groups doing 2 presentations at once on performance measures. And this will probably be real short because obviously police services satisfaction is way up, so we'll conclude here. Now, we're going to discuss police services satisfaction 1.07 performance measure. And again, that performance measure does fall into the council priorities, which is safe and secure communities. As far as this performance measure, we're looking to achieve ratings of very satisfied or satisfied with quality of local police services greater than or equal to the top 10% of the national benchmark cities as measured in the community survey.
So why does this measure matter? Positive relationships with the community, increases cooperation between community and police, increases likelihood of solving cases, reducing crime, measures of community sentiment, ensures communication between community and the police, and helps to deliver effective strategies to reduce the fear of crime. This all encompasses how people feel about the services that they're receiving from the police department.
So As of the 2018 community survey, we were at 72% of our respondents reporting that they were very satisfied or satisfied with the police department. Our target on this one is 90% by 2022. Over time, again, there's not a very clear pattern, although we were lower in 2018 than we have been in previous years. You can see we're closer on this one to our benchmark than we are in terms of feelings of safety. We are also above the national average on both of these measures. And that's our target by 2022. We'd like to see annual increases here. As with the last measure, this is a map of our character areas showing how people responded to the survey. And unsurprisingly, the areas in which we have more room for improvement are the same as with feelings of safety. It's no surprise that police satisfaction and people's feelings of safety are highly correlated. Again, towards the central and north, as you noted, around the ASU area, those are some areas where we tend to score lower on this measure, and that means that knowing that, we can target our strategies accordingly. Again, here with age, this is very similar to the previous measure, all of these. 18 to 34 was our lowest again. Our older residents reported were most likely to report that they felt safe. In research on police satisfaction, like with feelings of safety, this is not what we see on a nationwide basis. Usually we see that older people, I don't know about age. Let me backtrack on that one. But definitely with race, we don't see this. Where white people tend to have the highest police satisfaction, definitely, in the research. And here, we don't see any really huge differences among our different ethnic populations within our city. Gender, again, males and females feel pretty similarly about the police. And again, people who didn't want to tell us about themselves, or in this case, people who are gender nonconforming, are not as satisfied with the police department.
So strategies, starting with training, fair and impartial policing. In 2016, the police department had implemented fair and impartial policing to address explicit and implicit bias and to train all of our personnel from our sworn to our professional staff members. Everybody was included in that because with your professional staff members, they're part of the face of the organization. Those are some of the first people that are going to have contact with the public. So it was important that we ensure that they also had received the training. It wasn't just completely law enforcement specific, but it is also about customer service based. There's a big piece in that in terms of how we provide that service, because if we have biases that are impeding exactly how we're going to effectively be able to provide service to somebody, that is going to be an issue. So it was very instrumental for us to be able to have that training in place and be able to continue to carry out the fair and impartial policing curriculum within the police department. We had a core group of individuals from the department that taught the training, and we trained the entire organization in this fair and impartial policing. So it turned out very well for us. In terms of de-escalation, the department had received a Smart Policing Initiative grant. With this grant, part of the centerpiece of the President's task force on 21st century policing was de-escalation, and it talks about with de-escalation the importance of being able to handle different situations that may come up that could escalate into a situation that we don't really want to go to. We don't want to escalate into an officer-involved shooting. We want to make sure that we are trying to de-escalate some of these situations. And so we put together a small core group of people that are the de-escalators in the department, those that are known for being able to talk people down and everything, and to sort of create a core group to assist us with providing an overall training model that the department can be able to utilize as best practices in making sure that we're implementing de-escalation and carrying it out in the best way that we possibly can. And so that's being developed and continuously evolving. As everything evolves in society, we have to continue to evolve as well as a police department and make sure that we're staying on top of that. And so that is a big portion of what our de-escalation piece is, as well as other key areas within de-escalation, which is the implementation of our body-worn cameras for that transparency piece that is so needed with community members. Included in that is with mental health issues that are prevalent right now in today's society, crisis intervention training is something that we have been very committed to, and that we have a large number of officers that are crisis intervention trained. That is, our department is higher than the national average in terms of making sure that our officers are trained in the department for crisis intervention training. In terms of community meetings, our participation in community meetings, homeowners associations allow us to connect with our community members and provide educational information and crime prevention and self-protection information to our community members. But it doesn't just stop with the neighborhood association or the homeowners association. We connect with our business community. We connect with different various groups such as the Arizona Muslim Advisory Board, the NAACP, many other groups that we are able to foster those relationships with and be able to have a running dialogue and be able to create a basically be able to address the different concerns that they may have or the issues that may come up in terms of addressing that from the standpoint that if they have a concern that is something that we can take a look at and further delve into and be able to come back to them and be able to hold ourselves accountable, hold each other accountable as to what that may be. In terms of public successes, traditional media, social media, this comes down to us being able to create and run our own narrative. With the presence of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, even Nextdoor, we continue to foster our relationships with community members and the general news media, right down to beat reporters. And then it's important for us to make sure that we are still continuing to connect with both traditional and our social media because we want to be able to create the message in terms of some of the successes, some of the things that we are doing out there in the community, and ensure that they have an understanding that there's more to just general policing of an officer just being within your neighborhood. They're doing a lot of different things right now. We're attending your community meetings. We're attending the events that are going on in your rec centers. The officers are volunteering time in other areas of the city, and so that's important to highlight and to be able to note. And so we want to make sure that those successes are always being pushed out there in the forefront. In terms of social concerns, again, regional issues that are always going to have a tremendous impact on us. Something that is very unique to us in terms of an issue or a concern is traffic-related issues within the city. If you have traffic collisions, that can be a major source of frustration for many of us, as we've all seen, between the traffic, not only just the traffic collisions, but the construction. I'm sure all of you have had a hard time getting here downtown at some point in time, right? So that's always going to be an issue right now for us. Community trust, again, procedural justice, and just adhering to those 4 pillars of being fair and in our processes, being transparent in our actions, providing an opportunity for community members to have a voice, and being impartial in their decision making. That's something that we strive for. But we always have to make sure that we are keeping the community at large very, in touch with that, and making sure that that's part of our compass in terms of dealing with community issues. Growth and development, again, as echoed in the last presentation, the daytime population and the increases that we're seeing, and the service population and how that is increased as well for us, as well as that vertical growth that we're seeing right now with the high rises and the number of officers that would be needing to actually deal and address some of the issues that we're seeing there, is that we'll definitely have to increase those numbers. So.
All right, that concludes the performance measure of
Police satisfaction.
Police satisfaction. All right. We're going back and forth. I do want to open it up for questions or ways we want to accelerate this.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Nice job. I guess one question I've got is your thoughts on the correlation between say, the impact of fear of crime might have on police satisfaction, or actually the actual crime, the UCR, the actual rate of crime in a given geographic neighborhood or area, and how that impacts both the fear and/or, I think that's the city manager's question a little bit, but how that impacts satisfaction. Have we done anything to correlate in the survey, at least, between those two measures to see that people who have high fear have low satisfaction, or vice versa, those kinds of things?
It's a good question, and the answer is not yet. It's coming, and there's lots of opportunities for some fairly sophisticated statistical analysis with this community survey, but at this point, we sort of just scratched the surface.
And the second question is tied to some of our strategies and or micro strategies for that matter, and how can or would we, to accelerate this, develop what I'll call assessments, whether those are pre and post tests or whether those are quasi-experiments where we can isolate an area where we do a given strategy in the city and we compare it to an area that's very similar in demographics where we don't, and is there plans for trying to use those kinds of techniques to measure our success?
I didn't catch all of it.
That was a long question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I
Didn't catch
got
all
a
of
little
that.
lost in there. So it sounds like
How can we do a better job of assessing at a micro level, or micro strategies that we do as part of the stratified model, or as part of our monthly things that we're going to start to measure?
We'll talk about the stratified model. This is Dr. Fritz, so PhD. Great question, and when we did talk a little bit about the stratified model and the other performance measure, and it is an important measuring piece. And as we build out, we used to have something called our crime suppression team meetings, and as police managers and our middle managers and our supervisors would get together monthly, and we would look at crime in the city, and obviously we tackle the day-to-day crime, the short hit stuff. We've got a upspurt in something like bike thefts or some thefts, but more of a strategy and long-term commitment. We used to have this crime suppression team. We've now moved to a stratified model, which is kind of following a national theme in the country with community policing and kind of bringing back the technology piece and the intelligence piece in policing, but really getting the right people involved, especially within the police department. So we're trying to stay in our lane, so to speak, and we have our supervisors and lieutenants handling some of the small stuff in the city, depending on what it is and where it's at. And then we have commanders getting involved in bigger pieces of zones or parts of the city. And then we've got the executive team if we need to look at, hey, this is going to cost a little more money, more resources. We're involving other areas in the city, other departments working together. Through that, we're able to measure a little better of our successes, especially if we've gone in maybe on a long-term piece saying for 2 months we're going to work a certain area of the city that we're seeing an uptick. Let's say every year school ASU comes back and we see an uptick of some burglaries and robberies in a certain area, and we get on that, and then we can measure that, let's say, after a couple months compared to the year before.
And as far as assessment on a micro level, at the moment, this community survey is our only citywide measure of these sentiment indicators. And so in order to determine whether or not any given intervention worked on a smaller scale, we would need to collect data at that level, both before and after, in order to determine if there was a difference. So to make that happen, we will have to do additional data collection.
As we, moving forward too, as we, become more skilled and efficient with our stratified model, it'll help with our police legitimacy within the community, because as we see that the model is becoming more effective in our use in the way that we are, promoting our strategies and communicating with the community on exactly how effective these measures are and how we're actually how we are able to provide better, mode of customer service through this model with them. I think that it will only enhance exactly what we're needing to do in terms of conveying that, that safety and police service satisfaction piece for the department itself.
Brooks, you had mentioned or noted the correlation with the two different surveys and the area of the city that we have a little bit of a lower satisfaction or lower feeling. And somebody else had mentioned that's near ASU, and then Commander Glover, you also mentioned car accidents as one example. And so I got to thinking about is there any sort of, while the survey does specifically ask about the city of Tempe and the Tempe Police Department, is there any sort of account for that we have, for example, ASU Police Department within the city of Tempe, and that we have, I believe, what is a fairly dangerous section of, I think US 60 and Mill is noted a lot for a kind of a dangerous area of car accidents. Is there any sort of anything taken into account for the survey, people taking the survey might be, in their feelings might be more related to a different police agency?
That's a good question, and unfortunately, right now, we can't tell. The survey only asks about overall. It's just a level of satisfaction. And so while you're absolutely right that individual experiences with both our department and with the ASU Police Department might be affecting those, as well as vicarious experiences through people that we know, we don't follow up to ask about people's experiences with those things at the moment in the survey.
I'm curious about your information related to gender, in that your information was showing on both performance measures that the male-female comparison was relatively close, but the non-conforming reporting and also those who chose not to report was different and looked like significantly different. Could that be attributed to sample size, or are we comfortable with these findings based on the number of people who responded?
It could be attributed to sample size, although the number of people who chose not to respond is non-trivial. Although this is sort of to be expected with demographic questions in generally, in survey methodology, demographic questions tend to be the least likely to be answered. Although it's interesting that the way that they line up in this case with feelings of safety and satisfaction with police. So as far as gender nonconforming, that is a fairly small sample size, and so that might have something to do with it. It's a really understudied population in terms of these measures.
Anybody else? More questions? When we talk about the idea for monthly surveying, one of the things that we can point to in terms of using the same company asking essentially the same questions, I want to say since 2007, we do have historical data going back over 11 years tracking both satisfaction with police services and also overall satisfaction with the city and city services overall. What's the correlation between the level of satisfaction over time with city services generally compared to police services?
No, I haven't run that one yet. It doesn't, that one actually didn't jump out at me in the literature, so I tried to stick with the things that were most relevant and that we could tailor to our strategies. Although it's an interesting area for study because it opens up a lot of opportunities for us to collaborate with different departments within the city.
And do we know to what extent satisfaction with police services is driven by, in other words, if you have strong feelings in either direction, as opposed to being more in the middle of surveys, is it driven more by actual contact with police over the course of a year, say either as a crime victim or as a defendant or as someone who got a ticket or whatever it might be, or actually had face-to-face interaction, as opposed to people who just have a general sense, haven't had any direct interaction, but just have a general sense one way or the other?
So both your own face-to-face interaction with police officers as well as vicarious interaction. So if Commander Glover comes and tells me he had a bad traffic stop and wants to complain about it, do have significant effects in broader literature on people's feelings towards police satisfaction. However, again, these are really complicated relationships and it's not the only thing. So yes, that has an effect, but it's not the only thing that matters.
And how much does it track sort of the larger national, ebbs and flows in terms of overall satisfaction with the police based upon events that are larger than any one community? Like, for instance, I think anecdotally at least, or maybe statistically, there was a significant bump in the increase in satisfaction or in positive feelings about police and public safety after 9/11, for instance, right? There was a spike.
So that does happen. Interestingly, with feelings of safety in particular, those things are sort of have the opposite effect. So the farther away something happens from you, the safer you feel. So events in your community tend to make you feel unsafe. Events in Los Angeles tend to make you feel like you're okay because that's far away. And I haven't seen a lot of research done with that on police satisfaction, but it's an interesting avenue for exploration.
But in terms of the national, because we're looking at that, right? I mean, the reason we're looking at making improvements is not because we're lagging behind the national average. We're actually ahead of the national average. What we're shooting for is this idea of these 11 benchmark cities. And I guess my question is, they are similar in size. I think you mentioned that during your presentation, maybe the first one. But how do they differ from us if they do in terms of income, demographic, age, race, gender, daytime population versus nighttime population? How, if we're going to compare ourselves to 11 cities, how helpful is it to know just how relevant the comparison is between those cities?
Well, strategic management, would you like to take this? This is a question that's actually applicable to all performance measures in which we use a community survey as our benchmark.
Thank you for that question. That is, right now it's based strictly on being a mid-size, so basically population. We are looking at diving a little bit deeper to get to a more apples-to-apples comparison, working with Dr. Fritz over there, identifying other university towns that would be relevant. We talked in depth about that in regards to just bike thefts. Something like that would not be as comparable in a community that has 9 months of cold, frigid weather versus we have 9 months of seasonal temperate weather. So we're looking at which cities should we really be comparing ourselves to and working with ETC on that.
I think that's something good to keep in mind when we talk about comparisons and benchmarking, that at some point we need to really, if we're going to continue down this road, it makes sense to make sure that the benchmarks are apt comparisons over time. So,
absolutely.
Well done. You guys have been under the microscope here for almost a full hour. So,
Yes.
Way to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Send us your ideas and suggestions to Tempe Accelerates at tempe.gov and visit us at tempe.gov/Tempe Accelerates.